But that's just it. What had happened? At what point did all of a sudden did it become a dirty thing for women to be into this stuff? Like in the eyes of so many of these men's rights activist types, or
Would you like us to field that question?
huh?
Would you like us to field that question?
Sure, go for it.
Because I am a men's rights activist, so you can
Okay.
hate on me. The reason why I don't like feminism is because you promote this idea that women are defined by being victims. If you look at the context of all of your issues, men also face considerable problems as well. And they need to be brought into the story, and not just for men's sake, because this hides men's vulnerability, also for the sake of challenging the notion that women are defined as victims.
Hi, Mr. Donacci. Michael. I'm Karen Strawn. I'm one of the honey badgers that was recently booted out from Calgary Expo. I just happened in my travels to stumble across your comment on a Kotaku in Action post on Reddit where you apologized, and I saw where you stickied an apologetic tweet linking to that post on your Twitter. Now, while I'm always leery of mainstream media for good reason, I believe you're being sincere in your expression of regret over what happened and what part your tweets to Calgary Expo might have played in that. I'm not sure whether you wrote an article in Metro News, the article that I'm going to link below, or whether you were just sort of part of the news as it broke, but either way, you are in a unique position to correct things if you so choose. And just forgive me if my voice is a little bit harsh. I can see my eyes are really puffy. My allergies are just going insane right now. But moving on. Michael, if you would like to know more about us honey badgers and what we believe and why anybody would support a movement like Gamergate, I'm going to ask you to feel free to respond to this, either publicly in a comment or a tweet, or privately through my email at girlwriteswhat@gmail.com. You can ask me anything you like, or we could set up an interview, whatever. Just for a little background on me, I've done several interviews. I've done CTV, CBC, Global, CTV News 1, Peter Schiff, The Young Turks, David Pakman. I did a preliminary interview with BBC TV, but the program didn't pan out. I've also been interviewed on several talk radio shows. I've been a scheduled speaker at several conferences and conventions, the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, where I also participated in a panel discussion with Naomi Wolf, and the Libertarian Parties of Wisconsin and New York, their annual conventions, as well as the International Conference on Men's Issues. One of my fellow speakers was Senator Ann Cools, and that was a joy to meet her and a privilege. And events sponsored by the Canadian Association for Equality at Ryerson University. So I do have a bit of a public profile. Further, my video content has been shown in classrooms in high schools and universities across the Western world, from applied psychology classes at the University College of Cork in Ireland to sociology classes at the University of Tennessee and Concordia University in Montreal, to social studies classes in at least 2 high schools in my hometown of Edmonton. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to take me seriously, and if nothing else does, then knowing all of this might actually do it. Now, at the moment, it's mostly conservative media, Breitbart, Rebel News, The Examiner, The Daily Caller, that's reporting on the Calex incident in any kind of balanced way. I know this for a fact because these are the only publications that have even hinted at asking us for a comment or a quote. If you read other media, there are no, progressive media, there are no journalists other than Patrick Klepek at Kotaku who even reached out to us for comment. Now, audio recordings of the entire panel discussion and Allison's brief participation in it that formed the entire basis for our ejection according to security when they told us to leave. Those are available online. Yet nearly every centrist or left-leaning media outlet has allowed the initial allegations of our disruption of panels and harassment of panelists to stand without any kind of real correction or follow-up. Now, I find it really weird that it's been mostly conservative media who've been interested in granting us a fair hearing in the court of public opinion, particularly since our views are downright progressive. I'm bisexual, as are Allison and Hannah, and none of us are typically feminine. Our cosplayer and co-host, Anna Cherry, is self-described as a professional naked girl, and we've enjoyed the talent and company of a former sex worker, Crystal Garcia, as a co-host on our podcasts. We even supported an initiative, a feminist game jam, to provide financial backing and tech know-how for women game developers after certain individuals publicly attacked them, DDoSed their website, and nearly destroyed their charity. This game jam, the fine young capitalists, and the overwhelming support from undesirables like us, actually spawned the video game character Vivian James, spotted on one of our posters, our dirty, nasty posters, who has since become a mascot for Gamergate. You heard me. Vivian James is the culmination of $40,000 raised by misogynists to promote women in game development. We honey badgers have many female, gay, bisexual, minority, and transgender fans. In fact, one of the people who made a point to come out and meet us at our impromptu gathering at Reader Rock Garden, and she ended up joining us at a local bar, is a trans woman named Stephanie, and she was a delight to get to know. Nearly all the interviews with us so far over this incident have been through conservative news sources. Again, the sole exception being Klepek at Kotaku, who briefly quoted me in a mostly not quite hit piece article. Now, in your comment on Kotaku in Action, you said what happened caused you to investigate more deeply than simply reading and trusting other journalists regarding Gamergate and things like that, and that your views have been challenged. I'm well aware that a person in your position writing anything favorable, that is not entirely condemning, about us, that might harm your career. And part of me didn't want to warn you about that, because if I didn't warn you, you'd be more likely to reach out to us, hear our side of things, and maybe even write a balanced and objective story about us. But I can't in good conscience invite you to do that without warning you accordingly. If you were to publish a fair and objective story about us, it might just be the last right thing you ever get to do. Still, the invitation stands. The Honey Badger Brigade are a mostly progressive group that supports same-sex marriage, sexual freedom, equal rights and responsibilities, freedom of conscience and expression, and an end to the enforcement of restrictive gender roles for both men and women. These views are considered controversial because we oppose the feminist narrative of men as a monolithic perpetrator class and women as a monolithic victim class. As Allison said in the panel discussion, we don't feel that comics or games or science fiction or fantasy should be coerced into being more diverse and inclusive, but that creators should be able to create and promote the content they want to, free from coercion and political pressure, to not be changed, but to be the change they want to see. This, of course, includes freedom of the press. Which makes me ask, if you need to be afraid to write a story about Gamergate or Honey Badger Brigade that isn't 100% negative, that doesn't pander to the mainstream narrative, I can certainly understand. But I would also ask you to ask yourself why you need to be afraid. The toxic narrative of feminism Allison was trying to address and challenge in that panel discussion was only further demonstrated by our summary ejection from the convention over unsubstantiated knee-jerk allegations of harassment and demands for safety and inclusivity for women. They ejected 5 certified geek women from the convention, including a cosplayer, a comic creator, and a published author of fantasy erotica, because one of us politely and courteously explained in an informal panel discussion that mentioned MRAs why she, as an MRA, doesn't like feminism. Since we were ejected, rumors have been flying on social media. Accusations of disruption of panels still continue. One commenter has even asserted that we were kicked out for harassing other booths and attendees by handing out manifestos. Our most substantial interaction with any other booth was to lend our next door neighbors a pen. I'd challenge you to find anyone at the con who received one of these alleged manifestos from us and can present it to you. The truth is, we didn't bring any leaflets and only spoke to the people approaching our booth, other than complimenting someone on their display or praising the mini donuts. Allegations that we somehow tricked the convention into hosting a Honey Badger booth are contradicted by the Honey Badger badges and banners and listing the con printed up in their programs and materials. Many, including the initial Mary Sue article, quoted our fundraiser blurb, which was Swiftian satire, as representing our true and sincere intentions. That we really have been spending decades only pretending to be nerds, geeks, creators, so that we can infiltrate nerd culture at this particular convention to spread our totalitarian message that nerd culture is just fine as it is, and that nerds are mostly just nice people who should be free to like what they like. While Calgary Expo has declined to post any actual rule, to publicize any actual rule that we broke, there's been a mad scramble among media and our philosophical opponents to find some valid reason, any valid reason, why we were ejected and why Allison was banned from future conventions nationwide. The reality is that there was no valid reason. There was also no valid reason other than prejudice and fear for convention staff or security to call police on us during our fan meetup in a public park near the Stampede grounds. Now, to his credit, the Calgary Police Services officer, who brought a van in anticipation of potential multiple arrests based on what was reported to him, was nothing but polite, understanding, kind, cordial, and fair. If and when the audio of our footage is cleaned up, you will be able to hear him telling us that we seemed like a really nice bunch of people, that we had every right to remain in the park for as long as we liked to enjoy the weather. And I just want to say, thank goodness he didn't arrive when one of my fans, who had to have been 12 or 13 years old, dressed as the engineer from TF2, when he was there, because I can't even imagine how concerned he might be if he had been there when the police arrived. So what is going on here, Mr. Donacci? 5 women and 5 men, mostly neuroatypical, one of them a visible minority, ejected from a convention because a woman politely and with permission expressed an unpopular opinion during a panel discussion. The police called on a peaceful gathering in a public park that was only held so that fans who'd traveled as much as 36 hours by bus to meet us could have the opportunity to do so. Rumors and false reports of fraud and malfeasance flying over social media without any evidence, because why? Because we're the bad people. Because we, as women in nerd culture, support a movement that they, the them, the they, the mainstream, the establishment, they, the people running the convention, the Mary Sue, which has business ties to the convention, that they, those people, say we want nothing more or less than to chase women out of nerd culture. We Honey Badgers are a group founded by women, populated by mostly nerd women, and we got booted out of an inclusive convention that was billed as a safe space for nerd women for courteously expressing our opinions and for supporting artistic freedom and an open marketplace of ideas. And it's Allison who's paid the highest price. Allison Tiemann. Her comic series Xenospora can no longer be promoted at any conventions run by the organizers of CalX. 7 years of her work as an independent creator, and she's been banned over allegations that she's a fake geek girl who is only attending to harass and disrupt the event. her audacity in choosing to put up a banner taking a stand against censorship, and her temerity to express her opinion as an MRA in a conversation about MRAs caused her to be censored for life by the organizers of CalX. Of course, that 7 years of work, much of which I have been blessed with getting to have a sneak peek at while it was in progress over the years, that was just a ruse to gain us bad people access to the convention, a convention we've been preparing to infiltrate since one of our members, Rachel Edwards, was in kindergarten. Yes, we singled her out at age 4 and have been grooming her ever since in our dastardly plot to cultivate in her an artificial love of My Little Pony, manga, and Doctor Who, and a plethora of other geeky things that would make her the perfect mole when we chose to make our move. I want to make it clear, the reason security staff at the con told Allison we were being kicked out was because there were at least 20 to 25 complaints on social media, complaining about the harassment at the panel. Now, I don't know if your tweet was one of those complaints, and I don't even know if any of the complaints on social media were made by attendees. But the convention was swift to shut down and expel a group associating with a consumer revolt consistently portrayed by mainstream media as misogynists and harassers of women just because they're women. What, Mr. Donacci, what is diversity worth without diversity of thought and opinion? What exactly was harassing about a female MRA politely standing up, asking and being given permission to speak to the thoughts and motives of MRAs? How did we infiltrate the convention pretending to not be honey badgers when all our convention materials clearly stated Honey Badger Brigade? How on earth could anyone have taken our Swiftian satire as a sincere statement of intention? How can the summary expulsion and blacklisting of a woman who spent decades in nerd culture and 7 years toiling to independently create a comic series, to be the change she wanted to see, be viewed and promoted as a victory for women in comics? And how is it that conservative media is open to the views of a gaggle of mostly gender-subversive, queer and progressive men and women, while the progressive media is content to call us misogynistic tradcons who want women chained to their stoves, all without bothering to contact us for a comment? How is it that I, as a woman, and not a typical one, ask anybody, feel more welcome among the men's rights movement and Gamergate than I do or ever have among feminists? How is it that a group of mostly progressive women promoting an ethical platform of tolerance, fairness, equality, and free expression can be so easily cast as dastardly, homophobic, transphobic, misogynist troglodytes? How is it that the media doesn't want to hear about, let alone report on, the abuse and threats I and my friends have received from people who object to my criticisms of feminism? How is it that tweets on Twitter from random trolls can be seen as institutional abuse and harassment, yet the use of institutional mechanisms, such as those at Calgary Expo, to silence and eject people, aren't seen as abuse? Pardon my language, Mr. Donacci, but how does an event that bills itself as fucking inclusive, diverse, safe, and tolerant justify kicking out a diverse group of people who hold a different opinion and politely fucking express it? One of the most common criticisms of Gamergate is that they're conspiracy theorists. This claim was repeatedly made when news broke with evidence provided of a private Game Journo Pros email list where journalists from competing gaming industry publications were discussing how best to push the desired narrative. This news broke on the heels of the publishing of a dozen or so Gamers Are Dead articles on major publications within 24 hours of each other, all of them promoting the idea that the gamer identity consisted almost entirely of privileged, cisgendered, heterosexual white males who hate women and want women out of gaming, and as such, the industry should not pander to them. Any suggestion that there may have been collusion involved in the release of these articles, whether based on nepotism or political affiliation, even when presented with screenshots to back it up, has been greeted with mockery and comparisons to 9/11 truthers from the journalists involved, who I'm sure can and should be taken 100% at their word when accused of collusion and corruption, as well as by progressive, feministy, left-leaning consumers. Yet somehow, these same people who mocked the gamers and other individuals who later became known as Gamergate as conspiracy theorists are now willfully gobbling down the Mary Sue's narrative that members of our group are fake geek girls who deserve to be kicked out of Comic Cons because we've been conspiring for decades to infiltrate nerd culture under false pretenses to promote our horrible and totalitarian agenda that nerd culture is just fine as it is and creators should be free to create the content they want. Listen, Mr. Donachi, I'm just a middle-aged mother of 3 kids who cares about leaving them a decent world when I'm gone. I have a high school diploma. I make a modest living waiting tables, blogging, and speaking at a few events. You can look at my Patreon and compare it to the women, like Brianna Wu and Zoe Quinn, that people are casting as the underdogs in this culture war. And you'll see I'm pulling in 1/10 of what some of them are, and 100th of what feminist frequency is. Look at the mainstream coverage available. Who gets invited onto CNN or the Colbert Report? Who gets written about sympathetically in The Guardian or Salon? Who gets to play the heroes in an episode of Law & Order SVU? And who gets cast as the villains without any screenwriters contacting a single one of them for the purpose of research? Who gets to write and enforce the rules at conventions, and who gets kicked out despite abiding by those rules? Feminists desperately want and need people to see them as the underdog, Mr. Donachi, but they aren't. They're the institution, the establishment, the status quo, the man. And there's an argument to be made that they've never been a grassroots movement. Watch some mainstream interviews with feminists and compare how many difficult questions they're asked compared to what I had to deal with on the Young Turks or David Pakman. Feminism is the status quo, Mr. Donachi. They're not the underdog. They speak from a position of political and economic privilege despite comprising less than 20% of the population. And they will portray anyone speaking against their actions or their ideology as a misogynist, and that accusation alone is enough to get that person excluded, all while they simultaneously claim that misogyny is rampant, endorsed, and normalized, that all of society has been conditioned to hate women and keep them down. I don't do this for money or for fame. I do it because I know it's right, and because as a waitress who slings ribs for a living, I don't have a prestigious career or pots of cash to lose over it. I do it because I feel passionate about the truth, about evidence, about empiricism, about honesty, honor, and justice. Not social justice, just justice, full stop. I do it because there are 4 boys, sons and stepsons, that I love, one of whom I have lost, and a daughter who is the most kind and fair-minded young woman I know. And I want the children I have left now, the 4 I have left, to inherit something from this society other than debt and regret. And you might be saying to yourself, it's just a comic convention. But we didn't pick this battleground. We didn't even realize there was a problem or a battle to be fought until it had already taken over all the other places where the real power is. And on that note, I'm going to leave you with some footage of what these underdogs do with impunity when one of us privileged patriarchal sympathizers tries to speak about male suicide.